listeners, it's Jana. Welcome back to Grief Out Loud. When someone you know dies suddenly, say in a car crash or from a heart attack or dies by suicide, there's no time to prepare. No time to say goodbye. Your world just stops, while everyone else's seems to keep going. In today's episode, I talk with Dr. Jennifer Levin. She's a therapist, educator, host of the Untethered podcast, and author of the Traumatic Loss Workbook. Jennifer specializes in supporting people after sudden and unexpected deaths. Losses that can leave you feeling like you've landed on a totally different planet, surrounded by people who really don't understand. We talk about how grief after a sudden or unexpected death can affect your mind, your body, your sense of safety, and even your understanding of how the world works. Jennifer also shares some simple but powerful tools for recreating a sense of grounding in the middle of the chaos. Okay, here's our conversation. Jennifer, welcome to Grief Out Loud.
Thank you so much for having me today.
I know I had the honor of being on your podcast, Untethered, and now you're over here. So I'm looking forward to our conversation. And your new book, The Traumatic Loss Workbook, just came out. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be the person to write this book at this specific time.
Yeah. Well, actually, writing a book hadn't quite crossed my mind. And I got an email from the publisher, New Harbinger. They asked if I would be interested in writing a book. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. But there was a catch. I had to submit a proposal. I didn't realize everything that was involved. And the woman I worked with was amazing. And she let me know up front that grief books weren't always things that did really well. And so she worked with me to develop a one-page proposal, which then turned into a full proposal and a big process. And about 5 months later, New Harbinger said they would like to write my book. It was exciting, and it was something that once I really thought about it, I was really passionate about doing, because I am very passionate again about sudden and unexpected loss. And there's not a lot of resources out there. One of the things that I needed to do for the proposal is they gave me 5 books to review. When I looked at what the major contenders were, up until that point, I had always been referring people to Pamela Blair and Brooke Noel's book. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye, which was the gold standard, as kind of still is. So to have a chance to write something that was a bit more current was a real amazing opportunity.
It's interesting that you came to be the person to write the Traumatic Loss Workbook, since your early education and career experience really was in more of like cancer care, oncology. What drew you to focusing on supporting those who have experienced a sudden or unexpected death?
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear the stories of how we get to where we are. This particular area found me. As you mentioned, I actually started off in hospice and in research, and then went back to school to realize I was more of a people person and wanted to be a therapist. And most of my clients early on were in oncology, and I still have a fair amount working with individuals and their families living with cancer. But I got a call one day from an organization that said, we've just had an unexpected death in our organization. Can you come out and help us? And I was like, yeah, I can. And it was when I was very new in my career. And so, you're still kind of young enough that you can do different things. And I loved it. And I loved the fact that the organization cared enough about their employees to want to do this. And I ended up working for them for almost 15 years. And then I had a group of clients, very young group of clients, kind of start to trickle in. And I remember the first one had just been married 2 years, and her husband had died from an addiction. And she didn't, she came for some grief support, and I tried to find a group for her. And all the bereavement groups that we could find had individuals who had been married for 40, 50 years. And she went to one of them and was like, I can't do this. I have nothing in common with these other, most of them were women. And so I started to provide specialized services at that time. I did my own traumatic, at that time, I called it a traumatic loss grief group. And we had two people. And then within 3 months, we had 12. And all of a sudden, that just started to be a specialty and something I became known for. And kind of overnight, my practice filled. The more specialized I became, the more clients kind of sought me out, and the more passionate I became that, wow, this is something that there's really a need for. And the more invested I became in working with this group of clients.
So, really seeing that unmet need kind of at the beginning, but then the more people coming to you made you realize just how big that unmet need
Yeah.
really
And
was.
how, and I was kind of in that younger age group at the time. And yeah, I just really connected with that.
Can we talk terms for a moment? Because
Absolutely.
people say sudden death, unexpected death, traumatic death, which is not, it's not really a term we use very much at Dougie Center because it always feels like that needs to be determined by the person who experienced the death.
Yeah.
But what do those terms mean to you? How do you define them? How do you interact with your clients around them?
I'm really glad you brought that up because, in one way they're semantics, and another way they have a lot of really powerful meanings. So in my book, so I didn't get to choose the title of my book, and the book is actually called The Traumatic Loss Workbook: Powerful Skills for Navigating the Grief Caused by a Sudden or Unexpected Death. And there were a couple titles that were thrown around, and one of the titles was Recovered, like how to recover from. And I actually said that I would not have a book with the word recovered. And I can say more about that later. But so I specialize in sudden and unexpected because I feel strongly about those terms. And traumatic is more of a subjective word, and trauma is actually a word I think that has gotten a little bit overused. But let's talk about sudden and unexpected. So, something that is sudden and unexpected would be, I've had too many young people, most of them women, who have found a loved one with perhaps heart disease or an aneurysm that they had absolutely no clue about. And, I have several clients who've just come home and found a loved one, usually a male in their 30s or 40s, or even in the workplace, that have just unfortunately died without warning, didn't know. So it was sudden and unexpected. There was no clue. And it takes an individual completely off guard, changes their life overnight. Then you can have something that's unexpected, but the death itself isn't sudden, a shooting, an accident. So it happens unexpectedly, but because of medical intervention, the individual may be kept on life support. And so that could be drawn out. And I want to say, first of all of these situations are awful. Whenever I work with people, and especially in a group setting, I kind of shut down. We are not going to have any competitive grief. We're not going to say which is worse because they're all incredibly difficult and incredibly painful. But that would be something that would be like unexpected, but the death itself is not sudden because, it may go on for a couple of weeks before, we see if the person's going to be able to pull through or a decision is made. And then I'm sure you're familiar with something that is sudden, but not unexpected. Maybe a loved one has attempted to take their life 3 or 4 times, or there's addiction. And I've worked with loved ones where they say, I've just been waiting for the phone call. I didn't know when it was going to happen, but I'm not surprised. And so those are different ways in which those terms can be used differently. So I hope that answers your question in terms of how to define sudden and unexpected differently, but they are very different. Traumatic, well, the word trauma, one of the basic ways to define it is when something happens and our coping mechanisms are overwhelmed and our body goes into a trauma response and kind of like that fight or flight, and we get stuck there. And it can be a very quick type of thing, or we can get stuck there for a very long time. But I think it's a word that gets very overused. But, you know, when you're having a trauma response, it's something where you can be having flashbacks, hypervigilance, kind of always waiting for that shoe to drop, that other shoe to drop, nightmares, just a lot of different symptoms. And what may be traumatic to you may not be traumatic to me, even though we had the exact same experience. And in a death that's sudden or unexpected, it could be if you find the person or you're in the same, if there's an accident, you're both in the same circumstances, or you watch it happen. It could have been prevented. You didn't have a chance to say goodbye. All different circumstances that could lead it to be traumatic. But I usually let the loved one decide if that's something, a word that they want to use. Could have been something like a traumatic interaction with the healthcare professionals. It could have been the relationship. You know, I've had somebody who was abused by their loved one, and it was a traumatic relationship because it was an abusive relationship, and then they died. I've had people who were glad their loved one was is no longer living, but because of the trauma in the relationship. So it's a very subjective term. You know, it's something that often the individual will come in and say. So whether or not, you know, like again, there's clinical definitions for the word trauma, but oftentimes it's something that a client will come in and define on themselves.
Well, I really appreciate you kind of going into the layers of those terms and the nuance and the subjective. I mean, I feel like they're all subjective, you know, but sometimes we can have a little bit more of an objective definition of them. And I find it so helpful to keep those terms broad and accessible because I've had a lot of folks I've worked with who their person died from a long-term illness.
Yeah.
Right. And nothing in our narratives about grief indicate like you qualify for sudden, unexpected, or traumatic. And they'll say, I knew they had cancer, but the doctors had said we would have at least a couple of years and they died in 3 months. And it caught me totally off
Totally
guard.
off guard. Yeah. So that would be something that was sudden to them. Yeah.
If not
Absolutely.
unexpected. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you. I always struggle with some of those terms because I feel like it just lets people end up in a place where they feel like I shouldn't feel the grief I'm feeling because I don't qualify. I don't check the box for this particular term
Yeah.
that seems to open the door to like, oh, you get more, whatever, support, time, any of those things that people maybe are struggling with. So yeah, I really appreciate that part of the conversation.
I think the individual should get to define it however they want to define it.
So what have you learned from your clients about sudden, unexpected loss, how it affects them and their grief? No small
Yeah.
question, Jennifer, just tiny.
So much. My clients are my teachers. So much about death and so much about life. All grief is hard, no matter what, and it's different. The lessons that they often feel so misunderstood and alone because they'll get comparison. Oh, when my grandma died, when my cat died, and feeling like nobody, like I've had a couple of several groups that I've run. Fork in the Eye group is one that they name themselves. The Alien group, just meaning that they don't feel connected, their grief, like everybody else. No one understands. They often feel crazy. You know, that's one of the things is like, oh my goodness, I just feel crazy. Like I don't belong in this world. I feel like I'm on another planet because their grief experience is so different. I mean, if you wake up one morning and you're living your life, going to Starbucks, going to work, and then you get a phone call, your life as you absolutely knew it is completely different from that moment on. It's like you can't relate to the world you're living in anymore. And I know you've experienced this many times with the people that you've interviewed. And they just don't know how to relate to other people anymore. And eventually, most people get back to being able to do that, but it can take years. And so during that time, just not knowing how to interact, and many people will then retreat and isolate because they just don't feel that they are understood or they belong. And I think one of the things I hear so often is that it is so hard to watch other people move on with their lives when they feel left behind and forgotten, both them as the griever and their loved one. You know, we hear so often that, after the funeral and everybody goes on with their lives, but, you know, aren't you over it yet? It's been a year. Watching the life move on without your loved one who just died in these, most of the time, horrific circumstances is so hard. So I've learned to have, personally, learned to have so much more empathy and compassion for people because you don't know what's happened in their worlds.
Yeah, I always get the image of like a rip in the universe when a death occurs, and the person who is left grieving is on one side of that rip, and maybe the rest of the world feels like on the other side of that rip in the universe, and it feels unbridgeable in some ways.
Yeah.
I wonder too, what stands out to you about the folks that you support who are grieving after a sudden or unexpected death, of how the death impacts them physically, cognitively. I mean, we've talked a bit about a little bit about the emotion and mostly about like the social disconnection that can happen. But what
Mhm.
stands out to you about how it impacts people in the body?
So, again, another great question. It impacts everything. A lot of people don't realize that grief is physical. One of the things that I like to say is that grief will take all of the issues you've dealt with and put it on steroids. So if you've had a problem with headaches or stomach aches or not sleeping or your ADHD or whatever, things that kind of were doing better or you were struggling with drinking or whatever, oftentimes grief will just make those issues get so much worse, or come back. The fatigue, the pain, the tiredness, the cognitive functioning, the memory loss, the concentration, just things. I've had clients forget to change their clocks after time change, drive the wrong way on a one-way street by their house that they've been driving on for 10 years, forget to pay the mortgage. I mean, these can happen even after an expected death, but I think the extreme or the amount of time is often longer after you've had a death that's been sudden or unexpected because there's just such that disruption in the mind and the way we think. And Frances O'Connor does such a good job when she talks about in her book Our Grieving Brain, and I think she just released another one, Our Grieving Body. Is that the
Yeah, Mary
yeah?
Frances O'Connor.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mary Frances
Hmm.
O'Connor. Yeah, it has such a physical and neurological effect. Dr. Ted Reinierson, who I'll talk about in a minute, but he also talks about the phantom limb effect. And, we all know that there's something called the phantom limb effect when you have a surgery and a limb has been removed. There's actually that physical sensation that the limb is still there. Well, when they've done some neurological scans, it's kind of a similar thing with grief. It's like our body still reacts as that other person is still there, as our brain is mapping and looking for that other person as well. And so, yes, it does affect us physically and cognitively and socially, and it affects how we show up at work. I do a lot of work in the workplace setting and in schools and how we're able to perform because there isn't really one aspect of our life that isn't changed after such a sudden or unexpected loss.
One thing I realized we haven't talked much about on the show is how to support folks or suggestions you might have for folks who have sensory memories that are so tied to the death itself. So, whether that's coming home and finding the person's body or witnessing the death or having some other sensory memory associated. I know those can be so painful, so agonizing, so disruptive. So just wondering how do you support people who are dealing with that?
Yeah, yeah. That's a real tricky one. I mean, in the beginning, I see a lot of people like with avoidance, where if their loved one was killed at a particular place, where they'll drive around or they'll take painstakingly efforts not to go anywhere near where that happened. And that's incredibly difficult if it's a place where when your loved one died at home. And that makes a lot of sense because there's an actual association between where your loved one died and a place. Some people find comfort in being at the last place where their loved one died, and some people find that it's too painful and there's no right or wrong. It's just a complete individual experience or preference, whether or not that's a comforting place or someplace that is too painful. And so you would want to start creating different types of associations to break that powerful negative association. So there's lots of ways that you can do that. I use certain techniques with clients, what I call, this is a tongue twister, thought stopping techniques, where if they're ruminating over and over again, or I have them pair a positive memory with a picture. And so every time that they are thinking negatively or ruminating over and over about a negative image, I have them all of a sudden, when the negative image comes about, to think about a stop sign and to hear an actual, remember when the old tape recorders when it came on? So, okay, so let's just say you're thinking of the location where your loved one died. So as soon as you do that, visualize the biggest stop sign you can ever see, and I actually have one in my office. Visualize the stop sign, say the word out loud, stop, or press a button. Visualize the stop sign and hear when the old tape recorder and you push stop, and then go right away to a picture, and it's always the same picture over and over of either your loved one, memory on the beach, or something in a still shot. And so you're creating a new visualization from the stop sign. I feel like I'm not doing a good job explaining this right now. But basically, so instead of that rumination over and over again, so you do the rumination, stop, and immediately go to this new image over and over. So to break that cycle of that negative thought process. And so that's one technique that I use. Or in my book, I talk about something I use, frozen orange. If you are having a grief attack or a panic of any type, to keep an orange in the freezer. And then if you're having difficulty or you're having dysregulated emotions, to get out the orange from the freezer, hold the orange, focus on the weight of the orange, the texture of the orange, how cold it is. This again is going to get you out of your head. And the cold sensation kind of acts as a little bit of a nervous system reset with the kind of like a hydrotherapy type of a thing It's definitely not the same as a hydroplunge, but another way to help reset the nervous system as well.
I love both of those. I appreciate the like interruption and the redirection. Kind of
Hmm.
makes me think of like a puppy. You're like interrupt the behavior,
Yeah,
redirect, interrupt, redirect, interrupt,
redirect. Yep.
redirect.
And that's what you're doing in the beginning, and also avoidance if that's what you need to do. But again, everybody's situation is unique, and so it's just kind of finding what's going to work for you in the very beginning.
Well, one way that our personal work overlaps, Jennifer, is with supporting schools or organizations when a member of their community has died. What have you learned in that work? And I will be honest, that work to me is always so like all the work can be kind of stressful and overwhelming, but that in particular, because there's so much moving parts happening and there's a lot of different
Yeah,
personalities and a lot of like frenzy at the beginning to like get it right. And so, yeah, what have
yeah,
you learned in that work?
yeah. So I don't know if you want me to talk about my approach. I've probably worked with dozens of schools at this point in my career. I have a business called Traumatic Grief Solutions and get called in and work. Worked once with a school who wanted to prepare for a child's death, and I thought that was so amazing that they wanted to take a proactive approach. A child who had cancer, a first grader. But usually we go in and work with the administration to find out what the situation is and make a plan. But doing something on multi-level, because that's, in terms of learning, that's the best approach. So, targeting the staff and teachers in terms of what does grief look like in the classroom, giving them an activity that's age appropriate. So, usually we spend the most amount of time in the classroom where the loss has occurred. If it's a student, I've gone in when it's been a teacher, and then we do something more for all of the kids, but then also to hit the parents because usually the work that we do is with private schools because it can happen a lot faster, and public schools are a little bit more complicated. I think you guys, and I'm coming from California, worked in the private schools in the California areas, but then doing psychoeducation for the parents, doing presentations on how to have these conversations with their kids that are age appropriate. And I have to say, you guys have some amazing, the Dougie Center, amazing resources on your websites for parents and staff on age appropriate and developmental resources. So providing parents a chance to, number one, giving them psychoeducation and then giving them a chance just to ask questions. Parents have a lot of fears and then questions that they want to answer and giving them just an idea of, this stuff doesn't necessarily show up right away. It takes a couple of months and they see it with their peers. They see it how kids interact with their peers. They see it behaviorally. And then, as I mentioned, classroom activities and just giving them an idea of what to look for and where they can get resources and then some follow up activities, a couple months later, and then written resources that they can refer to. So that's kind of the type of work that we do with the schools. So we did a lot during COVID, follow up after the fires went down and did some work in the schools. So just making sure then, so what I call high risk students. So if there's been a student death, and I worked with one school and there was a death of a cheerleader. So we called the cheerleading team a high risk group. So designing a targeted intervention for all of the cheerleaders since they had the most contact with the other student who had died. So just putting together kind of a thoughtful plan that can be implemented for the school.
Do you have a favorite go to activity? I'm thinking particularly around like elementary school age kids when it's been maybe a teacher or a fellow student has died. To like, what's one of your favorite activities to do with them?
So when it's a younger group like that in elementary is to invite the parents in and do an activity with the parents and the kids, especially when it's a younger one, because parents have very strong feelings, I have found, in what they want their kids what they want to share with their kids in terms of whether it be a religious belief or whether they want to use words such as heaven, and also wanting to make sure that we honor cultural beliefs. And so I love to have the parents come in, and then we may do an arts and craft type of thing, and give them an assignment together to make a card for a family member or just a drawing of how are we feeling. So it just really depends on what the situation is. But whenever it's elementary school, always encourage inviting the parent in for the activity as well.
Yeah, I find that to be one of the most complicated pieces of a lot of this work is what's the school's messaging? How's that going to land for the parents and the caregivers and their messaging? It's really tricky. I don't envy schools in having to navigate that. And to that point, I know this is like an impossible question, but if you were going to pick like the top 3 things for school administrators to be thinking about when it happens in their community, what would be your suggestions for them?
Yeah, another great questions, because school administrators are in such a tough position. They have so many stakeholders that they need to please. So, number one, to get a parent night right away with a couple different thought leaders or experts in the field, and have a panel where they can discuss different topics, and then have resources, kind of like a little bit of an grief open house, if you can say it, so that and a lot of times parents don't go, but at least knowing that the school is responding and has these resources available, then following up with an email and everybody's contact information, so that if, parents are really quick to criticize and judge schools these days. And so just knowing that the school put it on, these are the people who were there, these are the contact information, this is the resources that were available, I think is really important for schools. Second is to have a grief curriculum, and I use the word curriculum very loosely. So if something has happened, the next day we take an hour out. I think one of the messages, in our society, we don't do a very good job with acknowledging grief. And there's too much. I see it in the workplace. I see it in the schools. I see it in our personal lives. And so we take an hour out to acknowledge grief and not go back to life is normal too quickly. And so whether that grief curriculum is to, during this hour, that such and such happened. And so we are just going to, again, have a curriculum that's, 5 sessions that is going to be implemented throughout the year whenever something happens, have that developed. Very, very general. So that is going to be implemented during that hour, whenever something happens, so that we do take the time out to acknowledge. And then the third one, and of course, this is something that's very near and dear to me, is prevention. And that schools and community leaders engage in preparing, so that when something does happen, they are already prepared. They have a list of who are we going to call. When something happens, it's not an if anymore. Who are going to be our panelists? Who are going to be the references and the resources we're going to put out on this night? What are we going to have available? Because I see too many schools trying to panic at the last minute. And so who are our suicide people? Who are our people in, when there's been a mass disaster? Who are our people for this? What resources are we going to have? And unfortunately, it takes time and investment, but school counselors are so overtapped. They are so overtapped. And so to have this stuff already prepared in advance, so that it's ready to be implemented. And I know it's easier said than done, but it's something that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, we always advocate for schools to spend time creating a plan. Even if when it actually happens, you look at your plan and you're like, oh, we need to alter this because of this
Yeah.
circumstance, but at least you had a plan to start with.
Yeah, you have something to alter.
And that it's rooted in whatever your schools or your organization or your workplace's values and ethos are. So you have something
Yeah.
to go back to be like, why are we making this decision? Oh, it's grounded in our value that we hold all lives to be meaningful and profound, and we want to acknowledge every person in our community who, if they die.
Yeah. Yeah, and then just having some of those psychoeducation. I mean, earlier you were asking about, some of the tools or what we can do to support people. And there's so many, like I said, summits of the curriculum that you can have already developed. We didn't talk too much yet about the psychoeducation about the shattering of the assumptive world. That's happening left and right. And I know that sounds like a lot of psychobabble without really explaining that, but it's such an important concept because it's happening left and right now of in everything that we're hearing about. And so just having bits and pieces of information that is ready to be sent out, I think will go a long way to being prepared and being able to educate parents when needing to and knowing how to validate fears and concerns and just being able to respond.
What does that mean to you, Jennifer, this idea of like the shattering of the assumptive world, not just for schools or organizations, but even, for the clients individually that you support?
Yeah. So whenever there is a sudden or an unexpected death or any type of trauma, I mean, this has been a horrible week in the news with, the killing that went on in Utah. There was shootings at some schools this week. But, the assumptive world, it was first talked about, well, psychologists call the assumptive world as these expectations that we unconsciously build in our mind about how the world works. We're going to drop our kids off at school and they're going to be safe, and that the world is predictable. If we work hard, we're going to be rewarded, and the world is full of good people. And this book was first written by Ronnie Janice Bullman. And I think her three fundamental assumptions that the world is benevolent, it's meaningful, and that we as selves are worthy and will be rewarded for our good work. And when we experience something that is sudden and unexpected and this a traumatic event, these assumptions get shattered. And it's like the rug is pulled out from beneath us. And all of a sudden we feel vulnerable and the world feels so unsafe. And all of a sudden we realize we can't protect those that we love. And the world doesn't work in the way we thought it was. Now, some people don't have an assumptive world like that. If you grow up in a world of poverty or a world of violence, or, you live somewhere where there are shootings all the time, this may not be something that you relate to. But many of us feel safe in our world. And unfortunately, I think it's getting less and less. But all of those kids at Utah this week who were at that talk, none of them expected the speaker to be shot in front of them. And so now those kids are probably afraid to walk across campus. They may be afraid to be in school. And if you were in a car accident and you were hit and your loved one died, you're going to be afraid to be in a car for a really long time. And so that's what I mean by the shattering of the assumptive world. When something horrible happens to you or a loved one, you're going to be afraid for a really long time that something's going to happen to anyone that you love. And so it takes a long time to rebuild your assumptive world. And when you were asking, like, how do you go about living in a world where you don't feel safe anymore? And so it's all about stabilization. And it's all about how do you learn to trust again? And it's a really difficult process, but it can be done. And you need to surround yourself with safe people, and you need to surround yourself in an environment where you feel okay, and to acknowledge that we are living in times where things are changing, but there still is a lot of good. We just have to look a little bit harder for it and not to give up hope. And I mentioned I had a chance to work with Dr. Ted Rainierson, who does this restorative retelling. It's important to find somebody to help you during that time if you choose to use a therapist that doesn't re-traumatize you in going to therapy and telling your story all about the trauma or what happened, but can help you kind of build an alliance with your loved one and kind of focus on how he or she can help you adapt to your changes and what's going on with your life, and not focusing on how your loved one died, but in, regulating your nervous system, grounding yourself, finding safety again. And then you can start the grieving process once you've dealt with any symptoms of trauma that you may be experiencing. So I don't know if that was a little too much off course, but
It's all really helpful information. And it made me want to ask you, Jennifer, as somebody who's doing this work day to day and listening to these stories, they may not have been your story, but they become part of your knowing of the world, listening and being with people who have these stories. What's a practice that you turn to for yourself day to day?
yeah, well, this work has really changed me. And I don't know if it's a day-to-day practice, but more of a philosophy. I've learned that every minute counts. You never know what's going to happen. I don't go to bed mad. I'm from Southern California, and I moved to Whidbey Island in the Pacific Northwest during COVID because I wanted to live somewhere beautiful. And I didn't want to wait till I retired. When I find something that's important to me, I act on it because I don't want any regrets in my life, because you don't know when there's no guarantees. And that's what the assumptive world and learning about its shattering taught me. We don't have any guarantees. And so say what you need to say when you need to say it, and really don't take anything for granted. Tell the people that you love them when you have that opportunity. Experience the things you want to do. Identify what you're grateful for. I have so much love for my parents, and I tell them all of the time how much I love them. And I don't like, well, we could always do that later. Later's not a guarantee. So take advantage of it now. It's very important to me.
Oh, got a little shivers listening to you share all that, Jennifer. You have a lot of offerings. I mean, your new book, Traumatic Loss Workbook, is out, but you have other things. You have a podcast called Untethered. You have some online classes. Can you give listeners just a kind of short window, not short, like a small window into what your other offerings are that they might engage with?
Sure. So as we mentioned, the book came out in July, and I'm just now releasing an online course called the Traumatic Loss Online Companion Course, A Guided Path to Healing. And that releases next week. And it was really important to me to create this course because I wanted something more personal. So it's a video course that you can complete on your own time, and is a chance for me to lead individuals through all the videos, and they can see me demonstrate all the exercises, and then they do it on their own time. And then I was very fortunate to have other health professionals come on and do some videos and teaching. There's probably about a dozen individuals also talking about their experiences living with traumatic grief as well, or I should say life after sudden and unexpected death, because as I mentioned, it can be so isolating. And so to hear other people who are, living long term and share their journeys, I thought was really an important thing to add. And then once a month, there's an online meeting live with myself and other course participants so that you get an opportunity to do that. So I'm really excited about that. It's ongoing, so you can join anytime. And so you just have to go to the website and you can sign up there. And there's a promo code because we are launching a special. So that's exciting.
And then your podcast. Do you have your podcast?
I have my podcast. Yeah, we just released a new issue or a new episode 2 days ago in honor of Suicide Prevention Month.
And your podcast really focuses on guests being on the show, talking about their lived experience with sudden and unexpected loss. But a few of us professionals have been sprinkled in there as well.
Yes, I like to have a combination of both. And that's just been a labor of love. It's something that I'm really proud of.
Well, Jennifer, thank you for coming on the show, for sharing so openly about the work that you do, the wisdom you've gained of supporting so many people who have experienced a sudden and unexpected loss, as well as organizations and school communities, and for your contribution to the field and to people with your new book, The Traumatic Loss Workbook. I'm grateful for you and grateful for your time today.
Well, thank you, Jenna. And the podcast, Grief Out Loud, is such a contribution as well. And the Dougie Center and all of the online resources, it's been something I have been referring clients to for over 20 years and consider the gold standard when it comes to children and grief, and will definitely be continuing to do so throughout my career.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and listeners. Thank you for being part of our community, for making the show mean something, for sharing episodes with people in your life that you think might be helped or supported in some way by the conversations that we are having here. As Jennifer mentioned, we have a lot of online resources available, and those are all at our website, dougy.org. It's also where you find each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. And if you want to connect with me, you can email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. I'm always excited to share that the podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Grief Out Loud is a production of Dougie Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.